Hello, colleagues. So I recently posted on LinkedIn that I had finished my certification in coaching, the not so subtle subtext of that being that I'm open for business. But in that post, I really couldn't find the right words to describe my feelings, so I went with three: grateful, anxious, and excited. Now, I hope to make a video soon about emotional intelligence and the incredible personal and professional value of self-awareness. But what I was realizing most with that LinkedIn post is that here in this very domestic setting, as I think about a search for clients and jobs, I've actually been recalling a framework that I use quite heavily in my work in dynamic and conflict environments, and that I recently found is also used to train multiple branches of the US military. And that is the Cynefin framework. Now, successful entrepreneurs in my field and successful job seekers tell me that I'd benefit by narrowing down my menu of services on my CV to have one clear offer and then market that. But in such an unstable market and in such an unstable global context, I don't even know what potential clients need. And probably like many of you, I'm now exhausted at the multiple iterations of my CV produced, to the point that my CV actually doesn't read like English anymore. It's just buzzwords that I hope will catch the applicant tracking systems. So how should I act? Well, Cynefin gives us a guide to action, and I thought it would be good to try and go all in on applying this to my current and likely shared scenario. So what is it? It's a framework that was developed by David Snowden and Mary Boone, who first published it in the Harvard Business Review in 2007. And it focuses on four situational domains that organizations, leaders, decision makers, and even budding leadership coaches and job applicants can operate and make decisions in. And I'm particularly curious here if you agree with my assessment of where I think we are and what we should be doing about it. So, ordered systems, those that are described on the right-hand side of the screen, complicated and clear, are characterized by their predictability. And in these systems, there's a linear relationship between cause and effect. The same thing generally happens the same way over and over. These are the systems we build for our children to teach them that there is structure and order in the world. In obvious or clear systems, everyone can see and understand the relationship. We don't debate it. So the decision model, as characterized by the diagram, is sense, categorize, and respond. And in his explanatory video on this, Snowden gives the example of what side of the road do we drive on. The US and much of the world drives on the right, the UK and about 70 other countries drive on the left. If we get a rental car on a trip, this decision model might look like, what am I seeing? Where is everybody else driving? And I will comply. In this domain, we have fixed constraints. In the example I gave, quite literally, rules of the road. Try driving on the wrong side and see what happens. In the professional marketplace, this might be the job that we know and the job that we are comfortable with. Overall, if we were to summarize, to use some Rumsfeldian language, we might say we have known knowns. In complicated systems, it's still predictable, but just a little less obvious, and maybe only clear to those who are able and willing to study and understand the relationship between input and output. So in this domain, the the decision model is sense, analyze, respond. A good example here might be something like building a rocket or performing an appendectomy. There's only a certain level of expertise we'd want wielding these abilities. As the diagram shows, we have things called governing constraints, which are actually more like principles than rules, allowing for more flexibility for actors in the system to flex their ability to deal with complications that may arise. If this analogy were in the professional marketplace, this might be the job above the one we know how to do comfortably, or a job with another employer, or a very different kind of client. It's a stretch target that we might give ourselves, but if we were to summarize it again, we might say that we have known unknowns. The domains on the other side of the diagram are those that which lack predictability, and we don't get reliably the same results from the same input. And here in a complex system, there might actually be concurrent dependencies, kind of like a multivariable equation, if you can recall your high school mathematics. But in this case, we may not be able to see all of the variables. And these were the systems that I worked in overseas with some phenomenal colleagues. And Another thing that characterizes them is that to some degree you can actually try and make sense of the system, as we tried to do here in regional West Africa by trying to understand the conflict cycle. But as you can see, it gets rather complex, for lack of a better word, rather quickly. So, where should we invest our effort? In trying to make sense of what is a potentially overwhelming system? In the job search analogy, should we be trying to make sense of an applicant tracking system that actually seems to be quite whimsical in its nature and reduces us to a series of buzzwords? Cynefin actually gives us another way to respond, and that's in the decision model here presented as probe, sense, and respond. What this suggests is that we actually have within us the ability to move towards the cutting edge, a breeding ground for emergent practice, resulting in things like radical repurposing. The term here on the diagram, exaptive, is actually taken from evolutionary biology. These are traits that were evolved for one purpose that are later co-opted for a new one. That's kind of the question I'm sitting with now, for myself and for others. How can we best exact our professional skills developed in our past world, perhaps in a past industry that no longer exists, to a new one in which we find ourselves? Just to keep talking about the model a little bit more, to give Snowden his credit, he describes having enabling constraints in this model as we try to adapt to a new situation. Enabling constraints support consistent action for ourselves and others. In my international development work, it was a catchphrase: act, assess, adapt, or begin with the end in mind. The US Marines have their own: capture the high ground, stay in touch, and keep moving. It's kind of another thing I'm curious about, actually. What enabling constraints are you giving yourself in this phase? What mantras are you using to help yourself keep going? To finish out the model, the chaotic system is one where there's no patterns and no constraints. So our first action, paradoxically, is to create them, as Snowden suggests. Without probing, without analyzing, we act and then we sense and respond as best as we can to make sense of unknowable unknowns. Lastly, I said there were four systems here. There's actually five. Disordered or confused, represented in the middle of the diagram, is where we actually don't know what system we're in. So I present this model only to start the conversation, not necessarily to represent the framework. You can actually see and hear Dave Snowden explain his model on the UK's Open University site, and even Jennifer Garvey-Berger bringing this framework to life for a consulting dynamic. Both of them have more qualifications, more book titles, and much better studio lighting than me. I'll put the links in the notes. But what's also interesting is that when you hear Dave talking about his model, how he identifies the elements of this framework from social dynamics within IBM, social dynamics that then became enshrined in professional practices, it's just a good reminder that much of what we study in management science is purely observational and not normative. So to summarize, we are better leaders and decision makers when we understand what type of system we're operating in: clear, complicated, complex, or chaotic. The Cynefin framework gives us a decision model to follow once we've accurately assessed our system. An accurate assessment of what is and what isn't complex might help ensure we're not trying to resolve complex scenarios with standard solutions or standard systems with complex solutions. And I hypothesize that many of us are now operating in a complex system that requires either trying to make sense of an overwhelming system or, perhaps more energetically conservative, probing the environment, sensing to learn, and responding with concerted effort and repurposing the tools that we have within our skill set. So, if you've got time or interest, I would love to hear in your response, how are you exacting your professional skills from one job, career, industry, or identity to another? What enabling constraints are you developing for yourself, and what mantras are you putting in place to help make that transition? Good luck in all you do. I would welcome a discussion to help you address challenge, change, or opportunity that you're facing. Thanks so much.